The harbor's whisper. The salty tang clinging to the air was as familiar to Clara as her own breath. She stood on the jagged edge of a windswept cliff overlooking Black Point Harbor, the same harbor where she'd spent most of her childhood summers, watching ships carve their slow paths through the churning grey-green water. Today, though, it felt different. The rhythmic crash of waves seemed less like background noise and more like an insistent commentary on the knots in her stomach. She was waiting for him, or rather, trying not to be. Captain Miles Thorne wasn't exactly a lost cause. He was just unexpected. Miles was known far inland, near the bustling city where Clara's pragmatic father had built his successful architectural firm. He was smooth-talking, perpetually charming, and navigated the complex world of high finance with ease, or so everyone said. But here, at Black Point, a sleepy fishing community untouched by the gilded cage mentality, Miles represented something else entirely. The allure of the open sea, the freedom Miles seemed to embody on his sleek sports yacht. Clara adjusted her worn navy jacket as she watched a small lobster boat navigate the choppy waters below. It was backbreaking work for its crew, slow and steady, earning a living from these waters. Miles's business, speedboat glamour shoots, luxury yachting events, managing investments that smelled faintly of perfume and yacht fuel. She sighed, pulling her hair over her forehead despite the stiff breeze pushing it back. Why did he have to be so magnetic? The engine of his white yacht sputtered into life with a cheerful asterisk vroom as it approached the small cove where Clara stood. Miles Thorne leaned against the railing, sunglasses firmly pushed up onto his head, offering that signature confident smile that had made him impossible to ignore for years. "Clara Hayes," he called out, his voice cutting through the wind like a knife. "Up here." She didn't move immediately, caught between the pull of her professional demeanor and an unexpected flutter in her chest. "Yes," she confirmed, stepping forward slowly. "You're early." Miles chuckled, hopping down onto the rocks with practiced ease, landing perfectly like some kind of amphibious athlete. He offered his hand. "Early is good, less time for my ego to inflate." His eyes were sharp blue beneath his slightly too serious for his words expression. "Your boat looks expensive," Clara observed dryly as she shook his hand firmly. "And successful," he corrected smoothly, gesturing towards the yacht, then back at the harbor's drama. "This is why I wanted to talk." Clara frowned. This wasn't part of her usual freelance writing gigs or gallery openings in the city. This was impromptu business negotiation. She followed him as he walked along the water's edge, admiring the way his tailored shirt somehow looked comfortable against the maritime backdrop. They talked for an hour on Clara's small porch later, just out of sight from the harbor master's office. Miles wanted her firm, the Open Sea Collective, to handle a specific project, designing promotional materials and managing the branding for Project Seahorse. His new initiative aimed at connecting luxury yacht owners with sustainable, local fishing communities around the coast. It was an unusual request, bordering on altruistic for someone who usually valued perceived value over actual worth. "Miles," Clara said, trying to match his intensity without losing her own composure. "This is a genuine charity project, or are you testing my waters?" He laughed again, that infuriatingly pleasant sound. "Clara Hayes, you always assume the worst." He leaned against the porch railing, looking out at the waves, something unreadable flickering in his gaze. "Is it just business for you too?" he asked quietly. "Just work," she said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. She looked down at her hands, then back at him. "It pays well." Miles didn't push for a deal immediately. Instead, he talked about the challenges of his own work, the compromises inherent in designing spaces for the ultra-wealthy who often couldn't afford to see beyond their own horizon. He spoke with surprising vulnerability about missing the tangible rhythm of the sea after years spent navigating financial markets. Clara found herself drawn to this dichotomy, the worldly man appreciating something simple and elemental, the successful financier yearning for a different kind of life. There was an almost poetic contradiction in him that she couldn't help but explore further. Later that week, Miles called with another proposal. He wanted Clara's architectural firm to design a new community center on Black Point, specifically funded by Project Seahorse, a tangible way to give back and connect the wealthy investors with the hardworking locals, providing them with shared spaces and resources while promoting sustainability in their traditional fishing industry. Clara was hesitant again, this time worried about the potential pitfalls of such an ambitious project. "It's risky," she pointed out during their meeting at his office in the city. The plush surroundings felt alien as Miles outlined a plan that involved significant investment from his clients and deep engagement with a community he barely knew existed outside its digital footprint. "Risky for whom?" Miles countered, leaning forward across his polished mahogany desk. "Those investors or our reputation?" "For me," Clara said honestly. She had to admit she was intrigued. He saw something in her hesitation that hadn't been there before, an invitation to explore beyond the purely professional. "This project isn't just about giving back, Clara," Miles explained, his eyes serious for a moment. "It's about understanding. I've spent my career seeing what is asterisk, but not always what asterisk should be. This Black Point, it's beautiful, real, it has resilience." He stood up and walked to the large window overlooking the Hudson River, pausing there before turning back to her. "You think we can do it?" he asked directly. "Design something that respects its history, connects its people, stands up to storms." Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest, not just from his gaze, but from the sheer audacity of the question. He wasn't asking if she could design, he was asking if she could see what needed designing. "I need time," Clara said, meeting his gaze again, "but I'll look into it." He smiled, that slightly crooked smile this time. "Thank you, give me a week." A week felt like an eternity. Working with Miles Thorne on Black Point, it was like stepping onto another planet, or perhaps back to the place she thought she'd left behind years ago. The community center project was intense. Clara found herself visiting tiny apartments overlooking the harbor, talking to elderly fishermen whose hands were gnarled from decades spent hauling nets, and meeting young people dreaming of escape via their modest boats rather than corporate jets. Miles, during his visits, arranged by Clara as part of her due diligence, seemed genuinely captivated. "He's like a kid in a candy store," Clara's assistant Maya had remarked after one visit where Miles was animatedly discussing the design possibilities with a group of local kids about to be bussed off for summer camp. "Except it's not candy, it's, well, you know." Clara wasn't sure, but she found herself wanting him to see more. They started meeting weekly at a neutral ground, Clara's office or Miles's conference room. Initially, business was business, budgets, timelines, design sketches, but slowly, conversations drifted. They talked about the biting wind off Black Point, the taste of fresh-caught cod compared to imported fish, the quiet strength of these coastal people. Miles confessed he'd always been drawn to the complexity of structures, not just buildings, but systems, relationships, the intricate dance of waves and currents that governed a harbor. He saw beauty in the robustness required by harsh environments. Clara revealed her own frustration with designing spaces for fleeting desires, never addressing the needs she felt existed beneath them. She wanted to create things that mattered, enduring like the rocks Miles walked on or the boats tied up along the pier. One evening, as they stood watching a particularly large wave crash against the breakwater, a rare event given this summer's calmer seas, something shifted. The conversation wasn't about blueprints anymore, it was about their own worlds colliding. "You came here," Miles said simply, turning to face her directly on the pier stones. "You chose Black Point over your perfectly manicured career path." "It's messy here," Clara admitted, looking at the chipped paint on the old pier railing. "Maybe," he conceded, "but it feels right in a way I haven't felt since leaving college." He paused, his gaze searching hers intensely. "You see things differently now than you did 5 minutes ago." Clara didn't know what to say. Her mind raced with implications, work, business partners becoming something more complicated. He took another step closer, the space between them suddenly charged with an electricity that had nothing to do with architecture or finance. I've been trying to figure out how to approach this project properly, he said, his voice low and earnest. But every time I think about it, all I want is you. He reached for her hand slowly, tentatively. Clara felt her breath catch in her throat. She looked at the lines of Miles's face, the worry around his eyes now that he was here, not just the confidence she usually saw. Miles, she started, but couldn't find the words to finish. He held her gaze for what felt like an age longer than necessary before leaning in slightly and whispering against her ear, a stark contrast to his earlier businesslike tones. Clara, I know this sounds insane, maybe even illegal depending on how you look at it. But there's something else brewing here besides the community center. He kissed her temple lightly, then pulled back just enough for their eyes to meet again. What? She asked numbly. A proposal, he said, stepping back and pulling a small envelope from his pocket. Inside was not another contract, but an invitation, the harbor's whisper, to something completely unexpected, an intimate evening with the Black Point community, hosted by Miles himself at his own home overlooking the harbor, showcasing local art and music funded by Project Seahorse. I wanted you involved properly, he explained. Not just as a resource, but because, well, I think you're amazing. Clara felt overwhelmed. He was essentially inviting her to see Black Point, not through his sanitized lens or her professional one, but through his personal connection and her unique perspective. I thought we were discussing work, she managed to say, though her voice wavered slightly. Miles grinned, that knowing, charming grin again, the one that hadn't felt so potent before. Work is just a starting point for me now. The next evening was surreal. Miles's sprawling house overlooking Black Point was filled with his wealthy clients mingling with locals who were clearly unaccustomed to such opulent surroundings. Clara stood near him, directing attention, but mostly soaking in the atmosphere. The genuine smiles of people she'd only previously seen from a distance, the comfortable ease between neighbors who worked shoulder to shoulder on their boats. Miles handled his guests with surprising grace and charm, guiding them towards understanding and appreciating what was already there. Clara watched him beam as he conversed with families about local history or pointed out a particularly well-maintained old fishing boat, moments she'd captured in her architectural sketches, but Miles amplified organically. He looked different too, more relaxed, perhaps even vulnerable when discussing the challenges faced by their community. At the end of the night, just before guests departed, a small group remained. Clara, Miles, and two other close-knit locals, old man Fitzwilliam, whom Clara adored, and his granddaughter, Sarah. They stood near the shore where Miles had anchored his yacht. Sarah, Miles said gently as they watched the moonlight ripple on the water, I think you should take a look at this. He turned to Clara for help, perhaps sensing he wasn't articulate enough about something now. She knew exactly what he needed, her perspective and expertise in combining disparate elements into harmony. I've been thinking, she said, stepping closer to him, feeling his eyes on her intently, about how we make things last. Miles nodded slightly, waiting. Black Point has resilience built into its very core, Clara continued, looking out at the sea. The houses, the boats, but also the people. She paused, gathering her thoughts, then turned to Miles with a suggestion that felt both professional and deeply personal. What if we design something together, maybe a series of small workshops or events? Not just physical structures, but collaborative frameworks where these communities can showcase their skills, connect directly with interested investors like your clients, ensuring the sustainability isn't just economic, but cultural too. Miles's eyes lit up. He'd been looking for this kind of integration. But what about us? He asked softly, his hand finding hers instinctively. Clara felt a blush creep up her neck, an utterly ridiculous reaction for someone who prided herself on logic and structure. But the sea was whispering in the background, perhaps suggesting that maybe not everything needed to be perfectly calculated. Maybe, she murmured, looking at him with newfound clarity, we shouldn't calculate it at all. The happy ending arrived unexpectedly soon after. Miles took her hand and led her back towards his house, away from the shoreline whispers. There's something I need to ask you, he said, stopping before a large window overlooking Black Point in full moonlight. He pulled out another small envelope, not business cards this time, but a stunning ring box containing an engagement ring. "Miles Thorne," he began, his voice husky with emotion she'd only heard him use professionally once or twice nervously. "I've wanted to do something like this for years." His eyes searched hers for any sign of hesitation. "This place, these people, you've shown me things I never knew existed." Clara could feel tears welling, absurd, emotional tears, in the middle of a city life project. Or maybe not. She looked out at the shimmering water, then back at Miles's earnest face. "What if," she asked, her voice barely steady, "we both give up our perfectly defined paths for a moment and try to build something new together here?" Miles understood immediately. He dropped down onto one knee in front of her on the porch stones, an intimate gesture that felt both absurdly romantic and utterly fitting given their surroundings. "Clara Hayes," he said, holding her gaze as he opened the ring box again. "Will you give me a chance, not just with Black Point, but well, I can't wait any longer to be honest." He looked at her not as architect or partner, but as someone who had cracked his carefully constructed facade and seen him for who he truly was, flawed, yes, but passionate about the right things. He saw her too. Clara didn't need a moment's pause. She took the ring without hesitation, sealing their impulsive connection with her own nod of agreement. "Yes," she whispered, as Miles slipped the band onto her finger, "to Black Point." Their happy ending wasn't just tied to a grand project. It was simpler, leaving behind old ways for new ones, finding unexpected depth in each other's lives across vast differences, and deciding that maybe some structures were better left uncalculated. Later, as they stood watching the city lights blink on from another harbor miles away, seemingly disconnected from this rugged coast, but somehow intrinsically linked by their shared decision, Clara felt a peace settle over her. It wasn't the neat, orderly piece of finished blueprints. It was something deeper, more elemental, like two pieces finding each other in a vast sea. "Doesn't that feel weird?" Miles joked lightly, looking at his reflection in the glass-like surface of the distant water. "Like we just took over someone else's dream." Clara smiled back, feeling utterly content despite the monumental life shift they were embracing. She looked down at her new ring, a symbol not just of partnership, but of possibility. "Maybe," she said softly, "but right now it feels like exactly where I belong."